Okay, well, welcome to our final session of Synergy Online, and thank you all for attending Mapping and Routing with MobileTech and Schedule. All attendees will be muted throughout the presentation, but if you have a question at any time, we'll be collecting those in the questions module on your toolbar, and Gary Fair and Aaron Sparks will be fielding those questions and answering them as we go along today. Now I'd like to welcome Darren Morgan, Business Analyst and Senior Consultant at Key2Act. Darren joined Key2Act in 2005, serving our customers with his expertise in MobileTech, Schedule, Power BI, and optimizing business processes. Prior to joining Key2Act, Darren worked as a network and system administration consultant before finally specializing in ERP software conversions, first certified with Solomon and then with Dynamics GP. Welcome, Darren.
Well, thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone for joining. I have to point out, if you've been in my other sessions, you've heard me say the same thing, but I work for an accounting software company, but I don't have an accounting background. As you heard Laura say, I started off as a network administrator back in the 90s and got trained as a ERP software installer, system administrator. Started working in data migrations and in SQL, and so my forte prior to joining the company was in systems administration and in data and data migrations. But because of that expertise, when I joined the company 15 years ago, they were just starting to redevelop MobileTech. It had been on some older technology prior to that, was being redeveloped, and so I was very comfortable in dealing with internet security, mobile devices, and all of that sort of thing, whereas most of my coworkers in the consulting team, they weren't very comfortable dealing with internet security, and so I kind of became the MobileTech guru. And after many years of dealing with MobileTech, as Schedule was developed, and we started doing more of this stuff with routing and mapping, and because Schedule is a web-based product, my IIS administrator background is kind of, and my data background has kind of made me the go-to guy for implementing Schedule these last few years. So any of you who have had to Schedule deployed, if you haven't done that internally, then I probably connected with you at some point and got it installed for you. So let's move forward and start talking a little bit about how we can make use of Schedule and MobileTech and in this routing and scheduling realm. First off, we are capitalizing on Google or Bing's mapping APIs. So those are two programming APIs that are out there in the cloud and available for developers to tap into. There are some licensing issues you need to be aware of. You'll need to sign up through Google or Bing or both and apply for that key. In the Google, and I haven't done this for a few months, you always want to log on and read through the details, the fine print of what you're signing up for exactly. But in the Google Maps API key, you will have to sign up and give a credit card. Now, Google, although they have that credit card, they're giving every company a free credit every month. And last time I checked, it was a couple $100 credit per month to use that API key in the cloud. And you're using that when you go out and hit it to pull down a latitude and longitude reading and some other fine details. But the bottom line is, if you're using Google Maps, although they have your credit card number, I have not been aware of any of our Schedule customers that have gotten a bill from Google for using that API key. So the way that we are consuming that data out of the API is very small. With Bing, if you sign up for a Bing Maps key, Microsoft allows for a free use of a developer key for up to 125,000 hits per calendar year. So I've used a Microsoft Bing Maps development API key for all of my work for the last several years, and you have to check the fine print and what sort of a key you qualify for your company. But one of the things that I like to do to try to minimize the cost or optimize the use of these two different services, when I'm setting up a new customer, I would like to use the Bing Maps key to populate all of the initial data, the geolocation data. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, all the tables that need to be populated. But when you're using, if you got a database of 50,000 locations, you'll want to use the Bing Maps key to do that. And then on your day-to-day operations, use the Google Maps key. What I've found is the Google Maps key is a little more robust in the types of data they give back to you. So Bing is certainly fully functional, but if you want detailed routing, I think Google is a little bit better. So if you're thinking about deploying schedule, you want to take a look at some of the options available to you from both Google and Bing, and make sure you read the fine print and sign up for the appropriate licensing key. So when we're talking about schedule mapping, there's a handful of tables in our database where we're storing GPS data. It's the latitude and longitude, or geolocation data. And those tables would be our customer locations. So we need the latitude and longitude populated there. We can also populate latitude and longitude in our equipment master table. Now, we put that into the database several years ago because we do have a lot of customers. At the time, we had some customers that were maintaining cell phone towers or maintaining equipment at the cell phone towers. And of course, they don't have a street address. So we needed a way for the technicians to navigate to the location of that equipment without a street address. So we put the geolocation data into the equipment master table. The next table would be our technician vehicles table. That's the 113. And then the schedule is storing the resource extension in the resource extension table, the technician's home address. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So keep in mind that schedule reads the technician's current location from the vehicles table. And there's a way to update that. We'll get into the details in a bit, but that can be updated from MobileTech if you have MobileTech version 7 or higher. And can also, we can use your GPS software providers data to update that vehicles table. That way your dispatchers will be able to view in real time truck movement throughout the day using the schedule map. So when we talk about the technician's addresses in schedule, you can use the little sandwich icon, that 3-bar icon in the upper left here, and navigate to the administration tab and then the resource options. And this is where we want you to put in your technician's home address. Now I say home address because a lot of our customers, their technicians take a company truck home and they literally are being dispatched from their home in the morning to that first customer site, and at the end of the day they'll be returning back to their home. But that's not always the case. So if your technicians are driving to the warehouse or a depot and they're starting their day at a company location, then by all means you would want the company location to be entered into this home address because that's where they're starting and ending their day. So when we have all of our addresses entered, the technician home addresses as well as location addresses, you're going to need to populate that geolocation data in those tables that I just mentioned. And so you have to have your Google or Bing API key installed in schedule. And you're going to go into the administration tab, process requests, and click the appropriate button to capture that geolocation data and populate the database. Now, something I always have to emphasize, and in these last couple of years, as I've been deploying the schedule projects for many different customers, I've done this geolocation work for them and populated the SV200 table or the vehicles table. But one of the things that I have learned is the Bing and Google API keys, they are dependent upon the address 1 field in the database. So if you have some extraneous data in the address 1 field, like it's one bank tower spelled out, the OEM or ONE, the API key can't read that as an address. So if you've got care of the accounts payable, it's obviously not going to find an address for that. So I've seen a lot of that sort of extraneous data put into the address 1 field, and then the street address is put into the address 2 field. So you want to establish a policy for your company that whenever location data is being entered, the physical street address should always be entered into the address 1 field so that these API keys can read that data appropriately. So keep that in mind. So we've also got the ability to populate the locations table using Woodford. For years, Resco and our MobileTech has had this utility built into it, and it does require a Bing API key. Google is not even an option if you're going to use the Woodford tool to populate the data. Again, your address 1 field is critical. So you'll launch MobileTech admin and then launch Woodford, and you're going to navigate to the geocoding section on the menu on the left. And as you can see, you have to map to the entity, the location, that's the table in the middle tier database. You're going to select the fields, street address 1, city, state, zip, and insert your Bing map key at the bottom and fetch the data. So it's going to read the data into this table that you see here. And at that point, I can begin to select the addresses that have an empty latitude, longitude, and I can select a group of those. I do recommend that you could see there just to the left of the select button from index to index. And there's a checkbox on each one of these lines. So I would suggest that you do the geolocation for relatively small groups of data. This particular utility, I found that it can error out. And so you don't want to sit there and wait for 20 minutes for it to geolocate a bunch of data and then hit an error, and you'll have to start processing over again. So I would typically start out by capturing a few hundred addresses. So from index 0 to index 500, process those. If the data is in pretty good shape and you're not getting a bunch of errors, you will probably be able to do more than that. I've done as many as up to a couple thousand addresses at any one time. It does take several minutes for that API key to reach out to the web and pull that data down and populate the table. But I would be cautious about selecting any more than a couple thousand records at a given time, because I've seen too many errors and it ends up costing you more time overall to try to do more than that. It can be a little bit time consuming if you've got 50,000 or 60,000 locations in your database, but it's something that you don't necessarily have to babysit. You can set it to work on one monitor and go to work on anything else while you're doing this. And then once that geolocation data is populated in this lookup table that you see here, you'll want to click the save button in the upper left and save that data back to the MobileTech database. Now we do have triggers in place so that it's not just saved to the middle tier database, it's being triggered back into your GP company database, and it's populating the latitude and longitude in that SV00200 table, our locations table. Finally, any one of your users could manually populate the GPS data. So we exposed the latitude and longitude fields a few versions ago. It's been available to you. A lot of people don't know how to find latitude and longitude. Of course, you could use Google Earth. There's other utilities. I just like pulling up the address on Google Maps, and you could see the latitude and longitude in the URL. So I just capture that data, manually populate the fields, and save that record. Now, if if your users are not very disciplined, you'll want to maintain a smart list that's going to track all of the locations that have a 0 in the latitude and longitude field, so that you can make sure that that data is kept up to date. It's going to help your MobileTech technicians to navigate to the locations. It's also going to prevent some errors on the graphical schedule board when users are trying to schedule appointments for those locations. So it's a new feature that who's ever responsible for entering new locations at your company, they should be made aware of the latitude and longitude and make those required fields if you need to make sure that that data is being populated appropriately. If you do have a group of addresses that somebody for one reason or another failed to put in the latitude and longitude, you could go back and use the schedule utility or go back and use the Woodford utility and populate the bulk of those addresses using your Bing or Google API keys. I want to talk about errors, and notice some of the screenshots here. I want to apologize. You'll see the dates on these screenshots are a year old. And the reason for that is I put a lot of time and effort into capturing the data set. And I just didn't have the opportunity this year to repopulate a data set using Schedule 4. And the session that I gave last year, I showed these errors for version 3, and I left this slide in there because there's still a few people out there that are using older versions of Schedule. If you are on an older version of Schedule, by all means, call me. We need to get you upgraded to Schedule 4 as soon as possible. But the errors in Schedule 3 were kind of annoying. They popped up and they blocked you from doing anything before you could, without acknowledging the errors. And oftentimes, if you didn't populate the trucks table properly, or you're missing a lot of geolocation data, these errors would pop up and just force you to click on them. So shout out to Gary Fair and the development team for recognizing that was annoying and fixing it. So if you get geolocation errors related to the trucks or locations, if you're using Schedule version 4, it's a much less annoying error that pops up in the bar across the top, and you can close it if you want to, or it'll just fade into the background and disappear. So one of the neat new features and a good reason to upgrade to the most recent version of Schedule. In Schedule setup, there is the mapping options that you see here on the left. You've got a choice, a radio button choice, where we can only use one API key at a time. So you'll want to select the appropriate one. Like I said, I've got both keys installed here. Use the Bing Maps key for the bulk of the data updates at the beginning, and then we use Google for ongoing operations. But you'll see here, these are just the default settings. And frankly, most customers, I think, are pretty satisfied with the default settings. But you can see at the bottom of that setup window on the left, there are additional icons that are available from the Google API, I think, online, but you could download additional icons if you wanted to. But the icons that you see in the map on the right are the van is right there in the center. The technician ID is associated with the van, so that's Carlos 324. And the circles represent unscheduled appointments. And the buildings, the square rectangles behind the circles, those represent scheduled appointments. So we know that those are on the map. So your dispatchers who are glancing at the map can quickly see, oh, Carlos is almost at that building for the appointment he's assigned to, or there's an unassigned appointment that Carlos just left that building, and he could get to one of those other unscheduled appointments relatively quickly. They're pretty close by. So having that mapping available to your dispatchers is a great time savings and reduces a lot of drive time for your technicians. So let's talk a little bit about Schedule manual routing. So when I say manual, I just mean that your dispatcher is capturing appointments, dragging them, dropping them onto the guy's calendar. You can see here, Victor has 4 appointments for the day. 2 1-hour appointments separated by some drive time for each of those appointments. There's a couple of unscheduled appointments on the lower portion of the window that I could drag and drop those up, assuming there's enough time. But if I want to check and see, well, how much drive time is going to be involved in Victor's day, I can do that by pulling up the mapping and routing. So the scheduled appointments appear as buildings on the map, and I could select the resource in the mapping and routing, and I can route the current list of calls. So it's going to look at the scheduled appointments that this guy has, and if I were to add additional appointments to the list directly from the map, I could then choose either route the current list or optimize the current list. So let's talk about the difference between the two. If I process the route, as you see on the left, Victor's starting his day at point A, and the way that I set up the appointments, the order in which I set up the appointments, causes Victor to drive all the way down to the south to point B, and then drive back along that same route that he started on to get to point C. Then he's going to drive back again to point D and to point E to finish his day. So obviously that's not very efficient. Now there might be circumstances under which you have to do it that way. But if you want to optimize that route, you can allow the Google Maps API key to do that for you. And if you select optimize, what happens is what you see on the right. From Victor's starting point in the day, he's going to stop at the next closest appointment at B. Then he's going to drive down to location C, D, and E, and then he can drive back home at the end of the day. So optimizing the route is a great way to save gas, save drive time for your technicians. So if I want to schedule some additional things for this technician, we've got the feature, and I skipped over this on the setup window a few seconds ago. I apologize, but you can set up a 30-minute lunch break or a 1-hour lunch break, however long the break is that your technicians are required to take. And in the mapping and routing window, you can click on your little knife and fork icon or button at the top, and that will add the lunch break in the middle. And if I had put in 30 minutes, it would show that that lunch break was 30 minutes. But in looking at this, what I want to point out is that the estimated appointment time is included on the each appointment, and then the drive time is calculated. And what the Google Maps API key will return to us is a total time for his day based on his starting location and ending location back at home, as well as the drive time between locations. So very efficient in helping to make sure that your dispatchers are not scheduling your guys for 3 hours of driving and 8 hours worth of work every day. So once I've decided that route is optimized and it's good, I'm going to commit that and save it to the database. And this is what shows up in MobileTech for your MobileTech end users. The specific times of the appointments with the allotted drive time get applied to each of those appointments, and you can see those appointments spread out over the course of the day. So when you're using schedule for route planning, and I should also point out that route planning, maybe it's not actually a feature that all of our customers use. The customers that are most likely to use this, well, the example that I'm about to show you was web landscaping. Last year I helped them with their irrigation, the spring startups of the irrigation. So they had several hundred locations that needed to have their sprinkler systems charged in the spring. So this is a routine that they go through every spring. Every fall, they're winterizing the sprinkler systems, and their manager, who's in charge of dispatching their two different crews, has to optimize their visits and optimize their route, because these two crews, they're able to do a sprinkler startup in 20 to 30 minutes, but then they have to get to the next location as quickly as possible. So they could do 8 or 10 calls in a day if the routing and drive time is minimized. And so that was kind of the exercise that resulted in a lot of this data that I mentioned. It took several hours to get all of this stuff together. Other types of businesses that we service, I know fire inspection companies. So any customer that I think that is doing inspections as a line of business, and those inspections are probably pretty easy to get a finite time on, to say, when the guy goes and does a fire inspection for this hotel, it's an hour and 15 minutes. It's predictable. And then we want to get him to the next location as quickly as possible. And we know with a good level of certainty that the inspection is going to be that 3 hours at the next one. But each month, when the sales team is signing up new customers and new contracts, we get thrown into the mix several new locations. And so if you've got an inspector who's responsible for managing all the inspections in the north side of the county, how do you account for the lost contracts and the new contracts that come on board? And how do you optimize the routes each month? Well, this is what the schedule route planning would be a good tool to help make sure that you're not allowing your inspectors to spend too much time on the road. I know that a lot of our customers, I worked with a few refrigeration companies last year, and a lot of our mechanical contractors, they just don't have that sort of a route planning need. It's more a matter of get the technician to his first job at the start of the day. He calls in when he's available, and we want to get him to the next closest spot, but it's not necessarily routing a schedule for a week at a time or a month at a time. It's a need for getting that guy to the next location quickly. So I just want to point out that this route planning is a very specific business case. And let's talk a little bit more about how this is going to work. So what we're looking at here, and I should have highlighted this, I apologize, but down in the black bar of our unscheduled appointments, kind of in the middle left of the screen, you can see that there's a count of 399 service calls. So these are all of our unassigned and unscheduled calls that are currently in the database. And what we want to do is filter that list down, because if we're going to focus on routing our irrigation team, then I need to filter this list. So by filtering it to the irrigation startups, what I've done is I cut that total count down to 113 calls. And I've also put on here the technician who is the crew chief for the crew that I want to route and focus on routing. So by limiting it to just these calls, when I pull up the map, I've got a much more manageable data set to visualize here on the map. So I can then visually see which appointments are close to one another and decide how I might want to group or route these calls. So what you see there is I've clicked on one of the unassigned calls. I just went to the furthest one to the east of town, and I can then add that call to the list by clicking on it on the hover box that you see. I can then go to the next closest one and add that to the list, and so on and so forth, till I've got several different locations. Now, another advantage to Schedule 4.0 is you can now highlight, put a box around these group of appointments and group them that way and add them to the list rather than doing one at a time like in Schedule 3.0. So another advantage to the newer version. But as I begin to click on these and add them to the list, what you'll see here is I highlighted all of the circles that I added to the route. You can see that the estimated hours of each one of these stops is 30 minutes. So these guys that are doing the sprinkler charging, they can do that relatively quickly. So now I want to optimize the current list. And after selecting those appointments and optimizing this list, now I can see the time of the appointments is a half hour, and I can also see the drive time between each appointment. So once I've selected a specific day, in this case, I selected the April 9th, and I'm satisfied that this crew can get these appointments done and it's a reasonable amount of drive time and a reasonable amount of appointment time. I can lock that in and save that route for that day. Then I can advance my calendar to the 10th of April, go through that same process again and schedule the next day. So from a scheduling perspective, the manager who's responsible for scheduling these teams can now sit down, optimize those routes for each day of a week, and have these guys on a schedule that's going to keep them busy all week long. And all of those appointments are going to show up on their MobileTech device in the appropriate day and time order. And again, as you see, the appointments list in MobileTech, all of the appointments are aligned according to date and time. So another thing I wanted to point out, and again, I apologize, this is an older screenshot, but our Google Maps API would allow a dispatcher to open up the map and see the guy's current location and route to that other address where you need him to go. But the Google Maps API key will show us real-time traffic, and it'll highlight those roads in red if there's a traffic jam. So this is another big feature that is helpful if you're in a congested city area, you've got technicians who are all over and a customer who's got an emergency call. You want to find the closest technician. That's intuitive, but maybe the closest technician is blocked by a tremendous traffic jam and he can't get there in time. But a technician who might be a little further away in terms of miles has got a shorter trip there because of the traffic, less traffic. So it's a great feature for dispatchers to get real-time traffic updates and understand who's the best technician to send. So let's talk about GPS error correction. So after populating many customer databases with location records, what I've learned is the Bing Maps and Google Maps API keys aren't perfect. And we have had circumstances where the data that gets populated into the database just isn't right. And the technicians have reported that, you know, they found themselves 200 yards away from an address and sometimes as much as a kilometer, half a mile away from the correct address. So if that happens, we really need your technicians to help us out and get that appropriate geolocation data into the system. So if your technician opens up his MobileTech device and there is no pinpoint on the map because somebody forgot to enter the latitude and longitude, he can still manually type the address in to Google Maps on his device and navigate there. But when he gets to that location that has not had the data updated in the database, he can use his MobileTech device to update the GPS. So let your technicians know if they got to the wrong coordinates and it wasn't the right address. Let them know they need to correct that, or if there wasn't any mapping data available to them, please, when you get to that site, update the GPS so it'll be in the database from now on. So let's talk a little bit about configuring MobileTech for GPS tracking. So this is a new feature in MobileTech 7. It is a Woodford option. So again, you would launch MobileTech admin from the tools menu bar. You're going to open up Woodford. In the Woodford application, you're going to select auditing on the left-hand navigation menu. And when you select auditing, you're going to be presented with a window similar to this. And we want to check the appropriate boxes. So we're going to enable auditing. We're going to include the GPS position. We're going to log, I like to log every synchronization event, and I like to log based on a time delay, 600 seconds every 15 minutes, or a distance in meters. So your cell phone will track when you've gone more than 500 meters, and it will also update that MobileTech middle tier database. The checkboxes down below, I like to know where was my technician when he completed this appointment. We always want your technicians to try to complete that appointment while they're on site, on the customer's site, and we would expect that GPS stamp to be there. But if the technician is delaying and he's waiting until he gets home later on, we'll know it because that appointment completion timestamp comes in with the GPS location as well. So all of this auditing data is held in the MobileTech middle tier. For those customers that I've set up with MobileTech auditing, I will usually set up a SQL view so that we can create a smart list, and you'll be able to use a smart list to audit the GPS locations coming in from MobileTech. So keep that in mind. Let me know if you need some sort of insight into the GPS locations coming from MobileTech, and we can build that smart list for you. Now, finally, let's talk about customization to link your GPS truck tracking software into schedule. So these are customizations that our technical consulting team has done for many different customers. These 5 customers, or these 5 software companies that you see here, FieldLogix, Fleet Complete, Geotab, Samsara, and Verizon Connect. The tech consulting guys have done multiple projects related to these softwares, and so they have pretty much the code written, and it's much cheaper to deploy this customization if you have one of these 5 software companies as your truck GPS provider. If you have another GPS software provider, we still can do that technical consulting work, but it's likely to be a little bit longer of a project because our tech guys are going to have to evaluate that company's APIs and figure out how to extract that data. They'll have to write the web services to import it into our data based on that service provider's API key. So keep that in mind. If you want to get your GPS, your truck GPS flowing into schedule, we can do that for you. And if you're interested in that sort of customization, just contact your CSM for a quote. So I think that's everything that I have. Laura?
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation, Darren, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us for the session. If you have questions after today's session, you can email us at synergy@key2act.com and we'll follow up with you directly. All of our Synergy Online sessions will be posted to the Key2Act resources site early next week, and you'll receive an email notification at that time. A special thank you to our sponsors who are really looking forward to connecting with you at Synergy this year. If you have interest in learning more about our sponsors, please visit the Key2Act resources site or reach out to your CSM. Thank you to everyone who has participated in sessions this week. The more sessions you attended, the greater chance you have to win the $500 gift card of your choice. The winner will be notified next week. Thank you all again for attending Synergy Online, and have a great rest of the day.